From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you very much, Sherry. We'll see you again next week. Now, a big day for lying it was today, but of course a day when nobody was really going to call it out. That changes right now. Now, for how long have we referred to the Prime Minister as each way Albo? Because he says one thing and then it normally takes a couple of weeks before he ends up saying something completely different. Well, welcome to Each Way Albo GST edition. Da, 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 da. Now, you remember, when he went to Western Australia, there was a little campaign running in the front page of the West Australian newspaper. So a reporter from the West Australian newspaper was sent out to ask, would the Prime Minister sign a pledge that GST monies will not be moved away from Western Australia? Now, it just so helped that the Prime Minister had a texter. I mean, he was not aware this was going to happen, right? He was also completely unaware that the reporter used to work for his own government, literally, but that's by the by. Anyway, this was the Prime Minister signing a pledge with a texter he conveniently had in his pocket. No change to GST handouts for WA.
If we're going to have a stunt, let's do a good one. Let's go to a tattoo parlour. We can get it tattooed on. Or I've got pens. Here you go. Here you go. Give us your arm. Come on.
I mean, how did he know this was happening? Is there any chance that the bloke who used to work for his government, who now's pretending to be the independent reporter, may have tipped him off? Whatever. Yesterday's news. But as you know, the distribution of GST funds is really important because it's the major source of revenue for all state governments. Now, inevitably, when there's one pie and everyone wants more than they had last time, people get annoyed. But when you have a big population like places like, say, Victoria or particularly New South Wales, where you feel you're putting too much in and everyone else is taking too much of the pie that you already have on your plate, well, you blow up. And the latest allocation is more for everyone else, a little bit less for New South Wales and Victoria. So the Labor State Premier said this today.
If the previous regime was in place, we would have got 94 cents in the dollar. Now we're looking at a situation where we're going to get 86 cents in the dollar, and a lot of that money is going to be sent to Western Australia, which is chock full of cash from the mining boom, or down to Victoria, which is now a welfare state receiving a whole bunch of money from the pockets of New South Wales families.
So this is a little odd, Labor versus Labor. But remember, the Prime Minister is the one who can go to Western Australia and sign on somebody's arm what the allocation is going to be. You see, because he's in charge, right? Or this is each way Albo land. So when it's bad news, guess what?
I recognise the New South Wales Treasurer is new to his job, but the system has been there for a very long time. We have not changed the system. Every year there is a debate.
So you can make a promise in Western Australia, but it's not your decision in New South Wales? Would that be a little bit of each way Albo? We can't say it's a mystery. We told you up front. GST edition. Da, 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 da. Now, let us talk about another lie that we need to talk about today, and there's plenty of them around. I'm telling you, it was a great day for liars, a fantastic day for liars. Now, as we know, this government is pretending that they are doing everything they can when it comes to the cost of living, the number one issue of people around the country.
To make sure that we do what we can to put that downward pressure on cost of living.
And we want to help people with that.
Because we know that helping Tasmanians with their cost of living is the number one priority.
We help people through these cost of living pressures.
So, in the preparation and speculation, and I couldn't possibly rule it in and I couldn't possibly rule it out game that we're going to play over the next few months about what is or isn't in the federal budget, when you're doing everything you can to deal with the cost of living, you've got a couple of surprises, like, say, giving back people the $1,500 that you took off them last year. Now, the expectation is that this government will either get very close to or probably get another surplus. Thank you very much. Mining in Western Australia. Thank you very much. Mining in Queensland, but shh, don't tell anyone. Apparently, the international export that we think we send around the world is good vibes from electric cars. The actual things we send around, not quite as environmentally friendly, but still, that's what props up our budget. Which is why, as we've talked about before, that we, the citizens, well, we are in a per capita recession. The government, however, well, it gets to just say 0.2%, 0.3% is enough to say we're still growing and we don't end up going into a technical recession. But Everything they can do on cost of living, they are planning to do, right? Well, no, because we learned today that the government has ruled a line under doing anything as significant as giving you $15 a week back of your own money. In fact, the tax cuts are the front and centre of the policy, and that's it. So, all the things they could do, we're pulling every lever we possibly can? Well, apparently not. Struggling households will need to make do with little extra in the May budget after Jim Chalmers declared there would be no cash splash but announced plans for a whole-of-government strategy to supercharge investment and underpin sustainable future growth. Rather than me reading it poorly, here's him saying it himself.
There will likely be additional cost of living help in the budget, but it won't be anywhere near the magnitude of those tax cuts. We are already providing a tax cut to every taxpayer and a bigger tax cut to more workers. We need to be upfront and say that any additional help will only be a fraction of that. Any extra help will be targeted, responsible and affordable. There will not be big cash splashes in the budget. It's as simple as that.
But you're doing absolutely everything you can, right? One of the things, of course, that they should be doing is to cut petrol prices. Why? Because 50 cents, 49 to be absolute about it, but 49 cents per litre is the amount that you pay in taxation. That is extraordinary. Not in the dollar, but in the litre. Right now, petrol prices, well, all over $2. Here's the latest numbers, which come from Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Remember, the toys being thrown out of the cot by Anthony Albanese pretending to care about this when it was $1.75. Scott Morrison doesn't know what's going on. Well, what the hell does he say about $2.24 right now for normal unleaded in Brisbane? You could make it a little bit cheaper by cutting the amount of tax, Prime Minister. But of course you have no interest in doing that, do you? Because it's decided by... No, it's decided by you. Ridiculous. Another example about the way that lefties treat people in regional Australia. Now, put simply, you are being punished for the way that you vote. Now, ultimately, the dream is from the lefties that are Teal and Independent or Labor or Greens, anyone but the current mob ends up taking over. Why? Because your concerns can just go shushy over there. A perfect example of how this works, of course, is that we constantly are told that the future when it comes to our electricity grid is not nuclear, it's not the system that works, it's nothing else, it's only the R word.
Australia's future as a renewable energy powerhouse.
That energy is renewables. That is the way of the future.
It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's good for the economy, it's good for the environment, it's good for household budgets.
Australia to be a renewable energy superpower for the world.
And therefore today I announce that in the Marrickville Dog Park we are putting... Oh, no. Any plans in any of their electorates? Oh, that's right. You see, the plan is that for them to all feel good and to get re-elected in the places that demand, we must have a renewable future. And let's be honest, they are essentially winning the political battle at the moment, no question of it, because people say that they have a problem with the cost of the transition, yet they don't seem to be telling a pollster anytime soon. But you do notice that all of the people who vote for the Labor Party, the Greens, the Teals, none of them have got plans for electricity generation to be taking place in their electorates. Yes, there'll be some solar panels on the roof. Yes, there might be a community battery every couple of streets, but there is no suggestion that the green parklands will be turned into anything other than green parklands. Whereas, of course, in regional Australia, the reality of us getting to 82% renewables by 2030 is about $1 trillion that we have to spend on millions of solar panels, hundreds of thousands of wind turbines, all of which do not last forever, all of which will eventually become landfill. But shh, we're only supposed to be worried about one type of waste in the energy conversation. Well, we see today, again, how people in regional areas are being punished because they don't vote Labor and they don't vote Green. They're also not being treated as the same citizens that would be able to complain about any sort of development that happens in the major regional cities, like, say, Geelong, or, of course, capitals like Melbourne. The Victorian government today went off to a conference and waved about with great excitement. New rules that will mean it will be easier for the firms who would like to cover our natural environment with solar panels and wind farms. Sure, being able to find a farmer here and a farmer there and more than a few bags of silver to be able to change their mind, but bugger their neighbours, bugger the cities, bugger all the other people around it. This was announced today. Now, we know, because we spend so much time in regional Australia with our town. Speaking of, got one coming up in a couple of days, couple of weeks' time. I'll give you a shout out to how you can join that in a moment or two's time. But also because of the common sense. We're on free-to-air television in regional Australia. We appreciate how regularly we turn up in your lounge room. We appreciate how regularly you send me emails to paul@skynews.com.au. I appreciate that every single time that we step in your direction, you step towards ours, and this is one of the biggest issues people want to talk about, which is their areas being changed by people who are not willing to change their own areas in order for us to change our electricity system, in order for us to be able to say that we're reducing some part of 1% of the global problem. But people are annoyed, particularly, say, around Ballarat. I thought there was going to be a sizable example of people that were going to fire up so hard about these AusNet wires, which connect to a renewable energy project, that they may well unseat Labor MPs, if nothing else, with an independent whose sole and one issue was pee off AusNet. But no, the electorate ended up voting again to send the same people back who were screwing over the very electorate that is so infuriated by what's taking place. And then, of course, there are the people who are willing to travel from all parts of the country to go to Canberra to make this very point. Now, they may well say, I understand renewable energy, but in the same way, you don't want it next to you, I don't want it next to me. And there's a whole collection of reasons why. But those people, well, they're all referred to as nutters by the establishment media. The access media, the establishment media, the Sydney Morning Herald in this state, well, basically everyone out the front of Parliament who was complaining about millions of solar panels or thousands of wind turbines was a lunatic who apparently was afraid of the World Economic Forum and telling us that we're all going to have to eat bugs at some point in time. Then, of course, there was the Turnbull Times, the Sensible Centre, as they like to say. First lockdown, then The Voice, now Renewables, the anti-government groups trying to find new energy and environmental battles, pretending that, again, anyone with an objection to any of the stuff that these people would not put in a local park or a golf course near them is some sort of nutbag, some crazy person who's a doomsday prepper, as opposed to somebody who just doesn't like what is happening in their area, or let alone some of the environmental factors. Or maybe, God forbid, one of the reasons why you have a problem with some of these projects is because you know where the solar panels are coming from. Rhymes with China. It also has particular provinces in China where, according to that far right-wing newspaper, the New York Times, according to the BBC, you know, that crazy Sky News primetime stuff, it's being made with slave labour. So maybe that's the reason you don't like them. Maybe the reason you don't like them is because of the environmental impacts that are going to happen once these things need to be chucked out. Maybe you're a former Greens leader who doesn't like the idea of a wind farm project because of the effects that it's going to have on birds. No. Everyone who opposes this stuff in their area is crazy, according to the people who wouldn't have anything change in their area. Now, I repeat, if we are going to go through a revolution where we go from one thing to this thing and we're all going to share the pain, well, let's see people share the pain. Let's see the doggy park in the Prime Minister's electorate. Let's see North or South Head in Sydney in the Teals electorate. Let's see a golf course being shut down in Zoe Daniels' electorate. Let's see in the centre of Brisbane whether wind farms can go on the South Bank beach. Of course, none of that's going to happen because we couldn't possibly ruin our environment. Everyone outside of our area, screw you, you don't vote the way we like you to vote, so here's twice. Perfect example. And now they're changing the laws so you can't complain. And even if you do complain, they basically say, yep, thanks very much, noted, computer says no, you get it anyway. A group of people that are already in the middle of a fight right now because there are plans to put super batteries around their part of Victoria are now getting ready for a second giant battery to be put there. Now, of course, all of these people will be dismissed as kooks and crazies and vaccine deniers and all the other garbage that they say to automatically say anyone who disagrees with what they're trying to do, bad man, bad man. Whereas, what are they doing in Yarra Council? Any plans to turn one of their doggy parks into a solar farm in order to help power their local government electorate? No, of course not. Instead, they're turning around and trying to increase parking fees on anyone who's got a big car because they scare us. Those big Dodge Rams are scary. Why doesn't everyone have a pushback? The idea, and these are the people that are going to turn around, and I guarantee the council will say, well, now the reason you've got to pay more is because of the stress that you're going to put on the roads. But these are the same people who think that electric vehicles should pay no registration tax or any taxes whatsoever, despite the fact that they can often be heavier than some other cars, meaning they do just as much damage to the road. Oh, but it's those trucks that need to pay for everything. Because, you know, it all just grows at Harris Farm, doesn't it? Seriously. Now, another example about the way the modern left works, which is that, just like the Prime Minister turned around and said, look, I know that politicians got the biggest pay rise they got in the past 10 years, but not my fault. Completely independent body made the decision. Sorry. But, of course, when it's good news, I'm completely in charge of everything. So what they like to try to do is they try to pretend that they can fob stuff off to people who they know are kind of already of their ilk, right? Not an awful lot of free thinkers, libertarians, conservatives, contrarians inside the public service. We all know that it starts at the green left and goes out to the, right out. That's where most of them are, right? Well, there's one word in particular that they think is very effective at being able to take power and give it to the people who they know will always back in their version of things. It's the M word.
Misinformation.
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 The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
Ooh. Now, we all know what a lie is. We all know what defamation is. We all know the things that are very obvious that you should not say, that you should not do. We all know. Hence why some of us have just noticed the action-reaction. As soon as you start to put certain words together, you start to get yourself into the wrong place, and not because you're challenging authority, but because you are clearly not telling the truth. But as you know by now, there's this whole new game which is being played, which is that the word misinformation, which essentially is just an opinion the government doesn't like or the powerful people don't like. It's because we know what a lie is. A lie is somebody deliberately saying something that isn't true. But if the government turns around and says, no, there'll be no problems with our new fuel efficiency thing, not one car will be forced off the road, but there's plenty of evidence that they will be forced off the road, that would be declared misinformation because the government said that it's not happening. And as we know, there is a plan to censor the internet. Don't use their words, use normal words. All right, they say that they want to use social media companies and fine them for the spread of disinformation because it's terrible for democracy, right? Lies. I'm not going to back any of that in, of course. But when we know that what they're really going to try to go for is when somebody shares in any social media platform stuff the government doesn't like, including perhaps comments from people they disagree with, based in data, and that's why every single night I show you the data, I show you the articles, I show you the tables. It's data, not the diatribe. Using crazy right-wing sources like the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the rest. But they, of course, as we know, want to censor the internet. They want to empower a bunch of public servants who are all out there to turn around and declare what is misinformation on social media. Now, believe it or not, even the people at the conversation, you know, the conversation, we're having a conversation because, you know, we're intellectuals. Conversation. They have said, yeah, it's going to jeopardise free speech. So that law is currently just a mess, but is making its way through Parliament right now. The whole idea is that social media companies will end up having to pay fines if a government authority turns around and says that the thing that's been posted there is misinformation. Now, a lie, I understand. Absolute defamatory, I understand. But the idea that the government, and it's the government that appoint all the people who will decide what is misinformation, please. Well, as you know, there is a new plan, and the new plan is for the Australian Electoral Commission to take a greater role in the legitimacy of public discussion and advertising in and around elections. Now, if I said to you, as we're having a chat right now, or a barbecue on the weekend, or a dinner party if we're fancy, should there be truth in political advertising? Yes. Everyone agreed. No one's going to disagree with that. But what's interesting here is that they would like to introduce a new system which is about going after misinformation. Now, it's all tied up with, as we've talked about before, the sign of an early election here. By the way, you have these conversations before you have an election, just before you have the election. So they can tell us it's 2025 as much as they like, and they can tell us it's going to be a no giveaways budget. An election feels like it's coming relatively soon. First opportunity is going to be August. It'll be a bit later than that, but still. Falsehoods designed to win votes in election campaigns would be outlawed under a new Labor plan to push for tough penalties to weed out political lies. What, like this?
In 1983, the Hawke Labor government introduced Medicare. The Liberals were totally against it. And now the Liberals have set up a Medicare privatisation task force. Everybody knows you don't set up a Medicare privatisation task force unless you aim to privatise Medicare.
Of course not. Under the South Australian laws, which are the model that they would like to use here, groups can be fined up to $25,000 for false political advertising. The rules apply to physical advertising, such as billboards and leaflets, as well as digital, broadcast and social media ads. Now, again, an outright lie obviously shouldn't be allowed, right? If you turn around and you say, this person is a insert, right? You can't do that. But if you believe one of the consequences of one of their policies is going to be something that they're not willing to talk about, well, then, yeah, you're allowed to mention that. But, of course, they'll turn around and say, no, that's nowhere in our policy documents. But another perfect example, right? In the upcoming election, whenever it's going to be, I'm pretty sure that the opposition is going to point out the failure of the federal government to deliver on this policy from the last election.
$275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275.
I love those every time, right? They didn't hide. This was one of their front and centres. Now, of course, the opposition's going to turn around and say, hey, what happened to the 275 promise? You clearly broke it. Well, you see, the Labor Party probably would be able to go to the Australian Electoral Commission and turn around and say, that is misinformation. Why? Because, as we've shown you, they haven't broken their promise. Just the modelling has changed. Roll this one.
Well, if you earn $45,000 a year, you pay little tax. It's about $4,000 a year. Those same people, Prime Minister, are still waiting for $275 off their power bills. Is that going to happen, yes or no?
Well, what you'll get as well is our energy price relief plan has made a substantial difference, not just to people's bills by lowering them,
but importantly,
putting that downward pressure on inflation.
That's the problem. Outright lies, absolutely. Nobody wants that in our politics. Nobody's pretending that we should be finding grey ways to do it. And we know what the game here is, which is that they're going to name the piece of legislation, you know, truth in political advertising. And then if the Liberal Party or anyone else votes against it, they voted against truth in advertising, and that's the carry-on that'll go on into the next election, particularly pushed by the Teals. But it's really important that we know what the rules are here and how they are potentially open to be misinterpreted. Now, remember, the government's defence against an attack on 275 is going to be, well, we made the promise and then the Ukraine war went really long, which is why we didn't deliver it. But they never announced that they weren't going to deliver it. So the grey area here, whereas it's pretty obvious, make a promise at an election, don't deliver it by the next election, you're in trouble. Unless, of course, you get to mark your own homework or your mates out there do. Now, you would have heard today a lot of people talking about banning TikTok. Now, I can't stand this app. It is nowhere near any device that I own. I think if nothing else, it's just sort of brain sludge. But also, we can't pretend that there's not an awful lot of people who like the brain sludge, because I'll tell you the truth about social media, be it TikTok or, frankly, anything else, but particularly TikTok. They're like casinos. Now, a lot of people don't like casinos because there's no natural light, there's no clocks. It's just basically a giant building full of dopamine. And to get the dopamine, you put money into the machine, it goes ding, 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 and woo, I feel better about myself. Or here I am, 50-50 chance, put it all on 7. Social media, of course, is just dopamine on dopamine on dopamine on dopamine on dopamine. And like any of these things, you get addicted to it. The very nature of these devices is to keep you using them as long as possible. And as soon as you finish using them, to want to go back to them almost as soon as you have finished using them. Because the way the system works is, as we all know, if it's free on the internet, you are the actual business. Your data, your movements, your activities, that all gets sold on to somebody else. Now, that is obviously pretty evil, but it's something that a lot of people have bought into, and most of us on some level have some connection to it. A little bit of Facebook, a little bit of Instagram, a little bit of X, too much of all of those things. But again, for an awful lot of people around the world, it is TikTok. But the grand difference between all the social media platforms and TikTok is that TikTok is, well, owned by a company called ByteDance. The people who own it, well, are Chinese. And under the rules of China, if China demands through its international security operations to get any and all of the information you have collected from your business, you have to hand it over to the state. So as you know, by now, the American government has turned around and the lower house of parliament has passed a law to ban it. But even then, they're not really saying about banning it. They're just saying that they need to sever ties with China. ByteDance in and of itself needs to no longer be a Chinese company. They need to be sold to, ideally, an American boss. Now, I can see why plenty of people have a problem with that part of it because federal government telling you what you should and shouldn't own. I get it. But it's China. It's not a normal country, and this is not a normal company. But there are so many little slippery things people throw into this debate, including, there's no such thing as TikTok in China. Correct, it's called something else. But a cybersecurity expert who used to work for social media companies, he spoke to the 60 Minutes program in the United States, and he talks about the difference between TikTok, as we see it in the Western world, and exactly the same thing that is available in China under a different name.
In their version of TikTok, if you're under 14 years old, they show you science experiments you can do at home, museum exhibits, patriotism videos, and educational videos. And they also limit it to only 40 minutes per day. Now, they don't ship that version of TikTok to the rest of the world. So it's almost like they recognize that technology is influencing kids' development, and they make their domestic version a spinach version of TikTok, while they ship the opium version to the rest of the world.
Nothing to see here. Yeah, that's why people want greater controls on TikTok. So anything that severs it from China and the influence that it peddles and the garbage that it and all of the fiddles that it does, fine, I'm all on board. But even further, if you'd like a comparison about the people who spend time on the American version of it versus the Chinese version of it, same bloke, different point.
There's a survey of preteens in the US and China asking what is the most aspirational career that you want to have. And in the US, the #1 was influencer.
Social media influencer.
And in China, the #1 was astronaut. Again, you allow those two societies to play out for a few generations, I can tell you what your world is going to look like.
How many times do we have to be told? In the same way that you would avoid a casino because bad vibes. You should have that feeling about social media. You should absolutely have that feeling about TikTok. But to people that are addicted to it because the dopamine, they're not interested in that whatsoever. So any suggestion of TikTok being taken away from them, like any addict, is going to be pretty bad politics. So that'll play out in the United States, but it's the lower house that's passed it. The Senate could take forever. Biden could, be asleep for a long time, which means in Australia, our government is going to do nothing until the Americans do something, maybe. Here's the Prime Minister confirming that today, but making it seem like, he's completely independent.
We're independent. We don't follow other countries. What we do is we make decisions based on our security assessments. Our security assessments means that on phones that have sensitive material, such as government's phones, we do not have TikTok.
Very convincing. Told you, good day for lying. Really was a massive one today. You see, the reason that they can sit it out is because they don't have to do anything until maybe America actually achieves what they've all wanted, which is the severing of TikTok to China. So Australia gets to sit back and pretend we're making our own decision. Young people, I'm still the cool Prime Minister, right? Have you met Toto? I've got a plane named after the puppy, him or her. So don't believe that Albo's sitting out a decision. He's going to get America to do the hard work for us. A bit like our national security, but we're completely independent, right? More in a sec here on Paul Murray Live. Great debate. Looking forward to it this evening. Who do you think's the winner and loser of the week? Jump into the dopamine machine. That is your local social media platform. More in a sec. Thank you very much for watching. I'm in a great mood tonight because I get to hang out with my mates, none other than the wonderful Linda Scott, of course, who is, on the City of Sydney Council. Tomorrow she's off hanging out with all the big wigs, fighting for local government in and around GST carve-up. That'll be fun. Can you press record for me? Don't no. Relax, everyone, relax. Michael Kroger, of course, the Liberal power broker and our dear friend in Melbourne, none other than the wonderful Christy McSweeney from the PR Council. One and all, hello. So I'm going to return to a few things that I mentioned at the first half of the show. So this government, we're doing everything we possibly can about cost of living. Feel free to cut petrol tax. We're doing everything about cost of living. Feel free to give back the $1,500 you took off everyone as the automatic tax return 12 months ago. Yet the Treasurer is now turning around saying, meh, a little here, a little there, but nothing bigger than the $15 a week tax cut to people earning $45,000 and above. Yet, Michael, no one seems to have a problem with this. No one seems to think that this is them under-delivering on what was supposed to be not just their central promise, but their central refocus after their political problems at the end of the year, because they win Dunkley and nasty Nikki Savva says Dutton's unelectable.
No, but forget about Nikki Savva. Get back to the real world, mate, which is this fact. Of course, with hundreds of millions of dollars splashed towards them, shortly after the by-election, July 1, the electorate were in a reasonably good mood down in Dunkley. So Labor did, I thought Dutton had a points win, but it wasn't a disaster for Labor. But, mate, what's going to hit them are two things. The $275 was said 100 times. You've repeated it tonight. Every single person in the country recalls that promise. Albo has never mentioned it since. He can't say he's going to deliver it. He runs dead every time it's mentioned. That is going to hit him in the face come the next election, because this man gave the whole electorate the view that, the impression, look, the cost of living crisis, it's easy for us to fix. Just flick the switch to vaudeville here and there, a few moves here and there, and it'll all be fine. And now everyone realised that was all bulldust and nonsense. So, mate, they do care. They will care at the time of the next election, and it's going to damage him very greatly indeed, mate. Yeah, Christy, it absolutely should, but so should all of the crab walking that we've seen, most notably 5AA a few weeks ago when it was, again, hey, 275, yes or no, is this going to happen? Oh, well, the Ukraine war, which, of course, had started, by the way, by the time they first started issuing the policy issues, of the election date that had been around for a while. And then when he's on television and won't answer it yes, no, again, you would think there'd be some sort of, hang on, PM, about that central thing that you mentioned all the time that now you're not doubling down on. Why is there no chase to the obvious broken promise?
I don't know. There's a case for the coalition and for the media, I think, to reframe the broken promise narrative of Labor away from the tax cuts. The tax cuts has landed well. They polled reasonably well, but people were sort of saying it's only an extra $15. The real broken promise is that no one ever received the $275. That is the broken promise that the media needs to start asking questions on. That is a reframing of the broken promise narrative. And in fact, it's two broken promises, the $275 and the promise around the tax cuts, which doesn't make too much of a difference to people struggling at the moment with the cost of living, an extra $15. Well, don't forget, how this could be solved politically, of course, is if you had an election before 2025. Because you see, the promise is about 2025. So if you can somehow slide in before then by maybe changing a whole bunch of rules around the election, electoral, how many senators, how it gets funded, who you can go off to about misinformation, perhaps then you wouldn't have to answer for it. But let's jump to that AEC side of things here, Linda, where, again, there isn't a conversation on television, a dinner party in your part of the world, or a barbecue in anyone else's. Should BS be pushed out of politics? Yeah, absolutely, right? Outright lies. Nobody, right? But we all know that political conversation
often can be what somebody believes to be the consequences of your policy. So if you turn around and say again, Labor Party, cut, because you're saying no increase in funding, right? So therefore, if it doesn't go up by inflation, it's a cut. Conversely, the Liberal Party about, say, electric vehicles and killing the weekend, right? Well, pretty obviously the weekend is still here, but we all know the metaphor that was being discussed. But it is not a perfect example of where the rubber hits the road and where this becomes difficult, is in the codifying, because, as I said, the government will look you in the eye and say, sorry, we can't do 275 because the modelling's changed, right? But if you were running against a candidate, you would absolutely say, but didn't you promise 275?
Well, I want to first say that it did absolutely warm my heart to see that beautiful Bob Hawke ad. May he rest in peace, defending Medicare. What a great piece of campaign material that was. But also, when you look at polling
what absolute
around...
rubbish.
You triggered Michael. I knew you were going to... Michael's going to rip you in a second.
Successfully couldn't
Bob
even
Hawke.
get through 5 seconds without upsetting you, Michael.
The great Bob Hawke. Bob Hawke, you made an absolute fool of that man. Australia's greatest Labor Prime Minister ever, and you stuck him up there, and you made a complete. You used him and made a complete fool of him in his declining years.
He was a very smart man and absolutely in control of his behaviours.
Disgraceful performance.
Let's just keep talking
okay, so let's get to
about
lying in
the political proposal, that is to ban lying in politics. You're right, Paul. The reality is, overwhelmingly, Australians do support a proposition because they don't want to go to the ballot box on the basis of false information. And I know that, of course, there'll be Conservatives that say all sorts of things about how terrible this is, but in reality, you can't lie if you're a company. You can't lie if you're a small business. You can't lie to people and you can't false advertise to them. You can't say your product is something. You'd be hounded down by a range of regulators, and rightly so. So why is it that you should be able to lie in politics? Why is it that you should be able to say completely false things in a political ad?
Like they're going to sell Medicare.
Say in a company ad in Australia, and yet that is legal. I think that's an unreasonable double standard. I think we should have the same standard for political truth-telling as we do for corporate Australia, and I think
whatever
Australians
the washing
are right
powder standard
to expect that.
I'm sure we're all fine with that, right? But also comparison marketing is acceptable. And this is an important thing, Christy, where America is a lot more into this, right? Where you turn around and say, my pen's the best pen because compared to every other pen in the market, survey says, we paid for the survey, that this is the best performing one of all time, right? You literally sometimes can even put brand against brand. That's comparison marketing. That is really, as close as we get in Australia, is the contest of team red, team blue, team yellow, team green, team orange, right? But also one of the ways that you are able to connect with people is to say, despite the BS they're selling you, this is the actual consequence of the policy. Yet I'm imagining the way some of these things can wriggle, if the government or the candidate turns around and says, no, it's not, then it goes away. And I just again, outright lying, very obvious. But there are some nuances here that the art of politics seems to suggest. Once you've arrived at the big house, pull up the drawbridge, and then you just get to be the one who decides who gets to compete.
And the great irony of this coming out today, when I saw a clip of the Prime Minister standing behind a Medicare banner suggesting that politicians shouldn't embark on myths-truths in political campaigning. And we've mentioned Bob Hawke and Linda's mentioned Medicare. That will go down. If the Labor Party wants an example of mistruths in political campaigning, the privatisation of Medicare campaign is the biggest one in recent modern history. And who is the arbiter of what is truth and what is one person's comparison? Is it the AEC? Now, I have the greatest respect for the AEC. They are an organisation of significant integrity. They are good at what they do, which from time to time includes losing Senate ballot boxes and various other things. Do we want the AEC to be in charge of determining for Australians what's true and what's not in political campaigning? And have we not forgotten that Australians have the ability of critical thought? If they read something and they think, oh, gee, that's true or that's not true. I'm not quite sure about that. Are we not trusting that they will go and find out? Do we have that less faith in the Australian public that they have lost all ability of political thought, of critical thought in politics?
Michael, sidestep again to the wider view. Generally speaking, governments only start fiddling with the electoral system about 5 minutes before we are due to have an election. It's generally the last piece of business. It's about doing the final deals that it will, in this case, increase the size of the Senate. That'll help David Pocock and the Greens. Put caps on spending, which theoretically helps the Conservatives against, say, the Teals. There's a whole bunch of people also who love more public funding because they don't have to go off and fund for it. But do you read this as, again, not an election tomorrow, first opportunity is August, probably a little bit later, but this idea about 2025, it solves two problems. One, they don't have to account for the 275 broken promise, and two, they're fiddling with the system now. Is this the sign of they're getting their ducks in a row here?
Absolutely, mate, absolutely. Yeah, when you've got a majority in the reps and you've got a majority with the Greens and the independents in the Senate, well, the world's your oyster. It's a question of what is possible here. And so, yeah, obviously Labor want to try and increase the representatives in the Senate, in the ACT and the Northern Territory. A couple of extra senators will make an enormous difference in a House which is only 76 members, and when you only need 39. It could entrench a left majority in the Senate well into the foreseeable future. So, yes, they're trying to do that. And, of course, there are trade-offs along the way. So the Teals, more than anyone, want caps on donations. This will have a dramatic effect on the Liberal Party for various reasons, more than it will the Labor Party. So, yeah, they're trying that as well. And, of course, that can stop Clive Palmer spending $100 million, which, of course, you use one extreme example, and is it extreme? And you say that's the norm. You keep mentioning Palmer and, everyone's like Palmer. Well, no, he's a one-off. But there should be, there should be some caps on what you can donate, but I think Labor are going to make them pretty low, and it's going to have a dramatic effect on the coalition.
Yeah, also, the fine point here apparently is it won't apply for this election, it'll be the next one. So you get all the benefits of being able to go to an electorate saying, here's all the new system, plus all of the advantages of being able to, rig the current one. Anyway, and when I say rig, I mean make it work in your favour. Don't run off to the umpire. Come on, the ghost is busy. All right, quick break. Back with more. Three very intelligent people who've all got three very important things to say. We will get to it straight after the break here on Paul Murray Live. Who's the winner and loser of the week? Tell us if you want. Email. Now, as you have come to expect, I have my say. We have a little debate, but every now and then I'm going to give the opportunity to the people that you love, who are the guests on the show, to be able to have a little spray about an issue that they particularly care about. We'll carve off about literally 60-ish seconds for everyone. Whatever second you take from everyone else, you take from them. I'm looking at you, everyone. Linda Scott, of course, represents local government at National Cabinet from the City of Sydney Council. We're here with Christy McSweeney, Michael Kroger, both of them in Melbourne. You've all got particular issues that you piped up that you'd like to have a quick run at. Linda, let's start with you. New South Wales is going to ban conversion therapy. Why good? Why bad?
Look, such a significant thing. This is something that perhaps the majority of Australians would not even know is happening. But for Australia's gay and lesbian community, this is a form of therapy that was really unfortunately popular and essentially taught people to hate themselves. It harmed their mental health by training people to think that there was something wrong with them and they shouldn't be gay or lesbian. This has a terrible evidence base because we know that it actually led people to self-harm. It actually materially hurt their mental health. So I want to say a big shout out and congratulations to Chris Minns, to Penny Sharp here in New South Wales. It is long overdue, but this week they've tabled a bill to ban conversion therapy. This is something that's banned in almost every other state and territory in Australia, and it's a significant thing. It is a very important thing for gay and lesbian Australians' healthcare and their mental health, and it won't affect every Australian. It won't touch the lives of the majority of Australians, but it's a massive thing and it will save lives.
All right, thank you. I have no dings, I have no bells. Can we do that for next week? Michael Kroger, you particularly want to mention the problems with visas from people that have been coming out of Gaza, out of Palestine, yet it's when they're in the air that the government works out that some of these people, they either haven't been true about what their past has been, but more importantly, about their plans about how long they choose to stay in the country.
So Penny Wong, Andrew Giles and O'Neill, probably with Bowen, the worst ministers in the government, have made a complete hash of this whole issue. First of all, Labor run dead on issues where they can't explain or won't explain. They just run dead. They give press conferences where their words have no meaning. There's nothing to report. They just run dead. They won't give information. Why is it that we are granting visas to 2,000 Palestinians coming from Gaza? There is no doubt that innocent lives are being lost there, and that is a complete tragedy. We all understand that. But why are 2,000 Palestinians coming to Australia? Polls have showed that over 70% of Gazans support what Hamas did on October 7 when they slaughtered innocent Jewish men and women. Yet 2,000 people have been given visas to come into Australia by this government. Do you know how many have been given visas to go to Egypt next door? None.
Yeah, zero.
Jordan? None. None. Saudi Arabia? None. Why aren't the Arab countries taking the Palestinians from Gaza, to whom we're giving visas on less than 24 hours due diligence by our immigration officials, Home Affairs officials, who are actually not in Gaza? And how do they know who these people are? Relatives of some people who are here. But if Egypt won't take these people, why are we taking them here in Australia? And the reason is because the hard left of the Labor Party are pressing Wong and O'Neill and Giles, and it is completely wrong, and Labor should explain themselves. In addition to then cancelling visas on these people whilst they're in Egypt on the way here. Right. I mean, what a scandal, what a shambles, what a disgrace by Labor.
Thank you, do appreciate it. Christy, last say, WA Girl and GST.
Australia's biggest whinge fest for the premiers was released this week, which is the Commonwealth Grants Commission carve-up, determining how much more GST Western Australia gets, quite rightly and well-deserved. It does underpin the nation, iron ore exports, coal exports, despite the Australian government wanting to shut down our amazingly, incredibly lucrative resources industry. They do recognise it does underpin the nation at least. So congratulations to Madeleine King, who has made that point today, often when quizzed about this. We've got the usual whinge from the premiers. Victoria gets $4.6 billion. I don't know why, because they're projected to have $177 billion worth of debt over the next 2 years that they can't repay. So I don't know what the equation is from the Commonwealth Grants Commission, but I would punt for Victoria not deserving any, given that they are just stockpiling money and they cannot pay any of it back.
All right,
Chris Minns, you're a whinger. You run the 7th largest economy and you're still whinging about getting more GST.
The only thing harder than trying to get everything out in about a minute is holding back and not interrupting. Everyone wanted to rip in. You could see everyone at some point was going, I just, that's garbage, and hang on, and these people on the plane, and then the Epstein and then conversion therapy. All right, just imagine all of the argument has happened as well, and all of the arguments you had in your head were represented by somebody else who just was polite and sat back. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Enjoy your weekends. We'll see you soon. Love you guys. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. 5 minutes to the late debate. I like that. We'll do that again next week. That's our show for the week. Thank you very much. Not this, but next Sunday, our town is moving to the northern beaches of Sydney. If you would like to join us, please do so. We're going to be in beautiful Balgala. Our town at skynews.com.au. I've got about half a dozen spots left. Let's fill them. Our town at skynews.com.au. Again, that's our show for the week. Thank you so much for your loyalty and support. Look forward to seeing you again Sunday night. That's the one for the hardcores. Here's the late debate. Go Yankees.